Monday morning, 1967. Palo Alto, California. A high school history teacher named Ron Jones walks into his 10th grade classroom at Cobley High School. He is wearing a tie. He is carrying a lesson plan about Nazi Germany. And he has no idea that by Friday afternoon, he will have accidentally built a monster. See, the week before, one of his students had asked a question. Simple question. The kind of question that sounds innocent until you actually try to answer it. The student said, how could the German people claim they didn't know what was happening? How could ordinary citizens, shopkeepers, teachers, doctors just pretend the Holocaust wasn't real? Ron Jones didn't have a good answer. And that bothered him. Because every textbook explanation felt hollow. Oh, they were afraid. Oh, they were brainwashed. Oh, it was a different time. None of that explained the mechanics of it. None of that explained how normal, educated, free people could willingly hand over their freedom and participate in something evil. So Ron Jones decided to do something most teachers would never do. He decided to show them, not tell them. Show them. He was going to simulate the conditions. He was going to turn his class into a movement. And he was going to see how far they would go. He thought it would last a day. Maybe two. A little classroom demonstration. Something the students would talk about at lunch and then forget. It lasted 5 days. And by the end, over 200 students were involved. They had created membership cards. They had a salute. They had a name. They were policing each other, reporting each other. Students who had been friends for years were turning on each other. And on the final day, when Jones tried to end it, some of them didn't want it to stop. That was 1967. Now, here is why I'm telling you this story right now, today. Because what happened in that classroom was not unique. It was not a freak accident. It was not some weird California thing. What Ron Jones accidentally uncovered is a pattern. A pattern that repeats throughout human history, and one that behavioral scientists have studied and documented for decades. The pattern is this: when people feel afraid, uncertain, and disconnected, they don't run toward freedom. They run away from it. They don't demand their rights. They surrender them. Voluntarily. And right now, as you're watching this, we are living through one of the most unstable economic and social periods in modern history. Inflation is squeezing families. National debts across the developed world are at levels that economists used to say were impossible. Trust in institutions is at record lows. Political polarization is off the charts. And every single week, there's a new headline about banks in trouble, currencies wobbling, or markets looking fragile. I'm not here to make some wild prediction. I'm not going to tell you the sky is falling on a specific date. What I am going to do is walk you through what actually happened in that classroom, day by day. And then I'm going to show you the psychological research that explains why it happened. And finally, I'm going to ask you a really uncomfortable question. If it worked on those students in 5 days, with nothing but a charismatic teacher and some made-up rules, what happens when the pressure is real? What happens when it's not a classroom experiment, but an actual economic crisis? What happens when the fear isn't simulated? Because the scariest part of the third wave experiment isn't that a teacher tricked some teenagers. The scariest part is what it revealed about all of us. Every single person watching this video, including me, is vulnerable to the same forces that took over that classroom. And the research says something that should keep you up at night. You don't need evil people to build a tyranny. You don't need villains. You don't need a grand conspiracy. All you need is chaos. All you need is fear. And all you need is someone, anyone, who stands up and says, I have the answer. Follow me. That's what this video is about. Stick with me. I'm going to walk you through all 5 days. And by the end, you're going to look at the world around you very differently. Let's start with day 1. Day 1. Monday. Ron Jones walks in and changes the seating arrangement. He puts the desks in rows, perfectly aligned. He tells the students to sit up straight, feet flat on the floor, hands behind their backs. He changes his tone. He's not the laid-back California teacher anymore. He's firm, commanding, direct. He introduces a concept, strength through discipline. He tells them that from now on, when they want to speak, they must stand beside their desk. They must address him as Murdoch Jones. Their answers must be 3 words or fewer. No rambling. No debates. Just sharp, clean, disciplined responses. And here's the thing that shocked him. The students loved it. Not reluctantly. Not because they were afraid. They actually loved it. The class, which had been chaotic and unfocused, suddenly became efficient. Students who never participated were now raising their hands. Students who used to slouch were sitting at attention. The energy in the room was electric. Jones later wrote that he was startled by how quickly the transformation happened. These weren't broken kids. They weren't troubled youth. These were normal, middle-class American teenagers in one of the most prosperous periods in American history. And within an hour, they were responding to authoritarian structure like they'd been waiting for it their whole lives. Why? Because discipline feels good when the world feels chaotic. Structure feels safe when everything else feels uncertain. And for teenagers, whose lives are inherently chaotic, having someone take control and impose order was a relief. They didn't feel oppressed. They felt liberated. Liberated from the burden of choice, from the anxiety of ambiguity. And this is the first lesson. Authoritarianism doesn't start with fear. It starts with relief. Think about that historically. When have authoritarian leaders risen to power? Not during good times, during bad times, after wars, after economic collapses, during pandemics. When people are exhausted and confused and just want someone to make it stop, the strongman doesn't come in with chains. He comes in with answers, and the people don't feel enslaved. They feel rescued. Day 2, Tuesday. Jones takes it further. He introduces a new concept, strength through community. He gives the group a name, the third wave. He creates a salute, a hand signal, where you curl your right hand in a wave-like motion toward your shoulder. Students are told to greet each other with the salute whenever they meet, in the hallways, in the cafeteria, before and after class. He also introduces membership. You're either in the third wave, or you're not. There's an in-group and an out-group now. And the moment that line was drawn, something shifted. Students started identifying with the group, not just as a class exercise, as an identity. Jones created 3 rules. Members must carry a membership card at all times. Members must recruit new students. And members must report anyone who violated the rules. That last one is the killer. Report anyone who violated the rules. Within hours, students were policing each other. And not because Jones threatened them. Because they wanted to. Because the sense of belonging was so powerful, so intoxicating, that the idea of someone breaking the rules felt like a personal insult. It was no longer Mr. Jones's experiment. It was their movement. They owned it. By the end of day 2, the class had grown. Students from other periods heard about it and asked to join. The energy was spreading beyond the classroom walls. And this is the second lesson. People don't just tolerate surveillance in authoritarian systems, they participate in it. They become the enforcers, because when your identity is tied to a group, someone breaking the rules of that group threatens your identity. It's not about loyalty to a leader. It's about protecting yourself. This is something that Stanley Milgram documented in his obedience experiments at Yale in the early 1960s. And it's something that Solomon Asch demonstrated in his conformity studies in the 1950s. When the group agrees, individuals will deny what their own eyes are telling them. They'll say a short line is long if everyone else says it's long. Not because they're stupid. Because the social cost of disagreeing is higher than the personal cost of being wrong. Now, take that principle and apply it to a society in distress. Apply it to a nation where the economy is cracking, where people are losing jobs, where the future feels unstable. The desire to belong to something, to be part of a group that feels strong and certain, becomes overwhelming. And the willingness to enforce the group's rules, to silence dissent, to exclude outsiders, it doesn't require a dictator giving orders. It happens naturally, organically, from the bottom up. That's what Ron Jones was watching in real time. And it was only Tuesday. Day 3, Wednesday. By now the third wave isn't a class exercise. It's a movement. Students who aren't even in Ron Jones's history class are showing up asking for membership cards. The group has grown from 30 students to over 40, and outsiders are noticing. Some want in. Others are uncomfortable. Jones introduces a new concept, strength through action. He assigns tasks. Some students are responsible for designing a banner for the third wave. Others are told to memorize the rules and recite them on command. Others are given the specific job of preventing non-members from entering the classroom. And one student, a big athletic kid, appoints himself as Jones's personal bodyguard. Jones doesn't ask him to do this. The student decides on his own that the leader needs protection. Think about that for a second. Nobody told this kid to become a bodyguard. Nobody gave him a gun or a uniform or a title. The social dynamics of the movement created the role, and he filled it. This is how paramilitary structures form. Not through top-down orders, but through bottom-up loyalty. People see a role that needs filling, and the emotional pull of the group compels them to fill it. On this day, something darker started happening. Students began bullying non-members. Kids who refused to join, or who made fun of the salute, were being isolated, shunned. Some were threatened. 3 students reported to the school library because they felt unsafe in the hallways. These were students who just days earlier had been friends with third-wave members. Jones noticed that the academic performance in the class had actually improved. Dramatically. Homework completion was up. Test scores were up. Students were more focused, more attentive, more driven than he'd ever seen them. And this is one of the most unsettling aspects of the experiment. Authoritarianism works. In the short term, it produces results. Things get done. Trains run on time, as the old saying goes. And this is why it's so seductive. Because you can always point to the results. You can always say, look, things are better now. Look how efficient we are. Look how unified we are. And you'd be right. In the moment, you'd be right. The cost comes later. Day for Thursday. This is where it gets genuinely frightening. Jones tells the students that the third wave isn't just a class project. He tells them it's part of a nationwide movement. He says that across America, similar groups have been forming in schools and communities, and that tomorrow, Friday, a national leader will make a public announcement on television to reveal the third wave as a new political party and a new direction for the country. He's lying. None of this is true. There is no national movement. There is no leader. He is making it up to see how far they'll go. And they go all the way. The students erupt with excitement. This isn't skepticism. This isn't wait, really. This is full-throated, genuine, electric enthusiasm. They believe it. More than that, they want it. The idea that the little classroom movement is part of something bigger, something national, something powerful, fills them with a sense of purpose that most of them have never felt before. By Thursday afternoon, over 200 students consider themselves members of the third wave. They have recruited from every grade. They have organized themselves into committees. There are students handling communications, students handling security, students handling recruitment. It is a fully operational organization, and it has been 5 days since a history teacher rearranged some desks. Now, here's what I need you to understand about Day 4, because this is the part that applies most directly to the world you and I are living in right now. These students didn't join because they were forced. They didn't join because they were threatened. They joined because they were offered 3 things that every human being craves: belonging, purpose, and certainty. Belonging. You are part of something. You're not alone. You have a group purpose. You have a mission. You matter. Your actions have meaning. Certainty. The confusion is over. Someone has the answers. Just follow the plan. When psychologist Erich Fromm wrote Escape from Freedom in 1941, he described exactly this phenomenon. He argued that freedom, real freedom, is actually terrifying for most people. Because real freedom means real responsibility. It means you have to figure things out yourself. You have to make choices without guarantees. You have to sit with uncertainty. And most people, when pushed hard enough, when scared enough, when exhausted enough, will trade their freedom for someone else's certainty. Every single time. That's what happened on Day 4. And that's what happens in societies during periods of crisis. The students didn't lose their freedom. They gave it away happily. Day 5, Friday. Ron Jones knows he has to end this. It's gotten out of control. What started as a classroom demonstration has become something real, something with its own momentum. He's got 200 students packed into the school auditorium, sitting in rows, wearing improvised armbands, giving each other the third wave salute. They're waiting for the national leader to appear on television. Jones walks to the front of the room. He turns on a large television set. The students lean forward. They're buzzing with anticipation. This is the moment. This is when everything comes together. This is when their movement becomes official. The screen shows nothing static. White noise. Jones lets it run for a few minutes while the students stare, confused. Then he speaks. He tells them there is no national leader. There is no nationwide movement. There is no third wave political party. It was all made up. Every single bit of it. And then he says the words that several students later described as the most devastating thing they'd ever heard a teacher say. You have been used. You have been manipulated. And you are no better than the good Germans you couldn't understand last week. He then showed them a film about Nazi rallies. The marching, the salutes, the flags, the faces of ordinary people caught up in something they believed was righteous and necessary. The room went silent, and then several students started crying. Not because they were angry at Jones, because they recognized themselves. They saw their own enthusiasm reflected back at them in those black and white images. The salute they'd been doing all week looked exactly like the footage on screen. The way they'd turned on outsiders. The way they'd policed each other. The way they'd believed without questioning. It was all there. And it was them. Jones later said that the hardest part wasn't running the experiment. The hardest part was watching the students realize what they'd become. Some of them were devastated. Some were ashamed. And some, honestly, were angry. Not angry at themselves. Angry at Jones for stopping it. Because some of them didn't want to go back to normal. Some of them preferred the version of reality where they were part of something powerful. And that is the part that should chill you to the bone. Because this wasn't a prison experiment with volunteers who knew they were being studied. This wasn't a lab with cameras and consent forms. These were real teenagers in a real school who genuinely did not realize they were being manipulated until the very last moment. And some of them, even after the reveal, still felt the pull. Years later, in interviews, several former students talked about the experience. Some said it was the most important lesson they ever learned. Others said it haunted them. One former student said he still thinks about it every time he sees a political rally on television. He said, "I know what that feels like from inside. And it feels good." That's the dangerous part. Now, I want to address something directly. There are people who hear this story and say, well, those were just teenagers. Adults wouldn't fall for that. And I understand that instinct. But the research does not support it. In 1961, Stanley Milgram ran his famous obedience experiments at Yale. He took ordinary adults, not teenagers, and put them in a situation where an authority figure asked them to administer what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person. 65% of participants went all the way to the maximum voltage. They could hear the other person screaming. Some of them were visibly distressed. And they kept going. Because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to continue. In 1971, Philip Zimbardo ran the Stanford prison experiment. College students, assigned random roles as guards and prisoners, descended into psychological abuse within days. Zimbardo himself got so caught up in the experiment that he didn't stop it until an outside observer intervened. The third wave. Milgram. Stanford prison. 3 different experiments. 3 different settings. 3 different populations. Same result every single time. Ordinary people, given the right conditions, will conform, obey, and participate in systems they would have condemned a week earlier. This is not a theory. This is documented, replicated, observed human behavior. And it doesn't require a lab. It doesn't require a classroom. It just requires the right conditions. And the biggest condition of all, fear, economic fear, social fear, fear of being left behind, fear of losing control, fear of the unknown, which brings us to right now. Before we talk about where we are today, I need you to understand the machinery behind what you just heard. Because the third wave experiment isn't just a scary story. It's a demonstration of specific psychological principles that operate in every society, in every era, including ours. The first principle is called cognitive load reduction. This is a fancy term for a simple idea. Your brain has limited processing power. Every day, you're bombarded with decisions, information, conflicting opinions, and uncertainty. This takes energy. This causes stress. And when external circumstances increase that load, when the economy is unstable, when the news is terrifying, when your future feels uncertain, your brain starts looking for shortcuts. It starts looking for someone or something that can reduce the number of decisions you have to make. This is why discipline felt so good to those students on day one. Jones removed the ambiguity. He told them exactly how to sit, how to speak, how to behave, and their brains relaxed. The cognitive load dropped. They weren't making choices anymore. They were following instructions. And it was a relief in the real world. This is why authoritarian leaders always promise simplicity. It's never here's a nuanced policy. Paper with trade-offs. It's I alone can fix it. It's the problem is simple, and the solution is simple, and anyone who says otherwise is part of the problem. That message isn't designed for stupid people. It's designed for exhausted people. And when economic stress is high, everyone is exhausted. The second principle is social identity theory, developed by Henry Tocqueville in the 1970s. Tocqueville demonstrated that humans will form in-group and out-group dynamics based on the most trivial distinctions imaginable. In his studies, he assigned people to groups based on whether they preferred paintings by Klee or Kandinsky. Complete strangers who happened to prefer the same painter would immediately favor their own group and discriminate against the other group, with nothing at stake, over a painting preference. Now imagine that dynamic when the stakes are real. When the economy is in trouble and your group says it's because of those people over there. The immigrants, the elites, the other political party, the other religion. The human tendency to divide into us and them isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. It's how our social brains are wired. And under stress, that wiring gets amplified tenfold. This is what happened on day 2 of the experiment. The moment Jones created a membership card and a salute, the students had an in-group. And once you have an in-group, you automatically have an out-group. And the emotional investment in the in-group makes the out-group not just different but threatening. Not just wrong but dangerous. The third principle is the normalization of incremental change. This is sometimes called the boiling frog effect, though the metaphor is overused. The idea is that people don't resist dramatic shifts if those shifts happen gradually. Ron Jones didn't walk into class on Monday and say, "We're going to become a fascist movement and you're going to report on your friends." That would have been rejected immediately. Instead, he started with posture, then rules of speaking, then a name, then a salute, then membership cards, then reporting. Each step was small enough to seem reasonable given the previous step. And by the time students were bullying outsiders and begging for a national leader, they couldn't see how far they'd traveled because each individual step had been so small. This is exactly how rights erode in real societies. No government announces, "We are now monitoring all your communications." They start with, "We need to protect children online." Then it's, "We need to prevent terrorism." Then it's, "We need to verify your identity for safety." Then it's, "We need access to your encrypted messages." Each step has a reasonable-sounding justification, and each step only makes sense in the context of the step before it. But if you zoom out, the distance traveled is enormous. The fourth principle is what psychologists call the agentic state. This comes directly from Milgram's work. The agentic state is when a person stops seeing themselves as an individual making independent moral choices and starts seeing themselves as an agent executing someone else's will. I was just following orders. I was just doing my job. I didn't make the rules. When you enter the agentic state, your personal moral compass gets disconnected. You're not a bad person. You're not making bad choices. You're not making choices at all. You've delegated that responsibility to the authority. And in exchange, you get relief from the weight of moral responsibility. This is what the student bodyguard did. This is what the students who reported their friends did. They weren't being cruel as individuals. They had entered the agentic state. They were agents of the third wave. And the third wave couldn't be wrong, because the third wave was their identity. Now hold all four of these principles in your head. Cognitive load reduction, social identity theory, normalization of incremental change, the agentic state. And ask yourself, are any of these forces operating in the world right now? Let's talk about what's happening right now. Not speculation, not conspiracy theories, just documented, observable facts. Fact 1. Global debt is at historic levels. According to the Institute of International Finance, global debt surpassed $307 trillion in 2023. That's not a typo. 307 trillion. In the United States alone, the national debt has passed $36 trillion. Japan, China, the European Union, they're all carrying debt loads that would have been considered catastrophic just 20 years ago. The Bank for International Settlements, which is essentially the central bank for central banks, has repeatedly flagged this as unsustainable. Now, does that mean the system will collapse tomorrow? No. Economies are complicated. Governments can kick the can down the road for a long time. But every serious economist, left, right, and center, acknowledges that the current trajectory is unsustainable. Something has to give. The question is not if, but when and how. Fact 2. Trust in institutions is collapsing. Gallup has been tracking public trust in institutions for decades. Trust in Congress, the media, banks, the medical system, and the criminal justice system are all at or near historic lows. This isn't a left-right issue. Both sides distrust institutions. They just distrust different ones. Why does this matter? Because when people don't trust institutions, they become susceptible to alternatives. When the existing system feels broken, any system that promises to replace it becomes attractive. This is the fertile ground that authoritarian movements grow in. Not in societies where everything works, but in societies where nothing seems to. Fact 3. The cost of living is outpacing wages. In most developed nations, housing costs, healthcare costs, and food costs have risen faster than wages for over a decade. The average young person today has less purchasing power than their parents did at the same age. This isn't controversial. This is just what the data shows. And when people can't afford to live, when they feel like the system is rigged against them, when they work harder and fall further behind, they get angry. And angry, desperate people are the raw material of radical movements. Every historian who has studied the rise of authoritarianism, from Weimar Germany to Mussolini's Italy to the collapse of democratic norms in South America, will tell you the same thing. Economic desperation precedes political extremism. Every single time. Now let me connect this back to the third wave. What Ron Jones did was create a microenvironment of stress and then offer a structured response. The stress was the confusion about Nazi Germany. The structured response was discipline, community, and purpose. And the students responded exactly the way the psychology predicts. What's happening in the macro environment right now is the same thing on a massive scale. The stress is real. Economic anxiety, social fragmentation, political dysfunction, the feeling that things are falling apart and nobody in charge knows how to fix it. This is the condition that makes populations vulnerable. And here's the part that nobody wants to hear. The solution won't be forced on us. It never is. Not at first. The historical pattern is clear. People in crisis don't resist control. They demand it. After the 2008 financial crisis, governments around the world were given extraordinary powers. Emergency spending, bank bailouts, quantitative easing, surveillance programs expanded. Financial regulations changed overnight. And the public didn't resist. The public was terrified. The public said, "Do whatever you have to do. Just make it stop." After every major crisis in modern history, the scope of government power has expanded, and it almost never contracts back to pre-crisis levels. This is not a conspiracy. This is a documented pattern that political scientists call the ratchet effect. Power expands during crisis and never fully retracts. The question is not whether the next crisis will come. The question is what we will be willing to accept when it does. What rights will we trade for stability? What freedoms will we surrender for security? What surveillance will we tolerate in exchange for the feeling that someone, somewhere, has it under control? Because that's what the third wave experiment proves at its core. It proves that the desire for order, for belonging, for certainty, is so powerful that ordinary, intelligent, well-meaning people will walk into a cage and lock the door behind them. Not because someone forced them. Because the cage felt safer than the chaos outside. And if you think you're immune to this, you're wrong. I'm not immune to this. Nobody is immune to this. The research is clear. The only protection is awareness. The only defense is knowing the pattern before you're inside it. Because once you're inside it, it feels right. That's the whole point. It feels like you're doing the right thing. It feels like you're on the right side. It feels like the people who disagree with you are the problem. Just like it felt right to those students. Right up until the screen showed static. Let me give you some historical examples, because this pattern doesn't live only in a California classroom. It lives everywhere. Germany, 1933. The Weimar Republic had been ravaged by hyperinflation and unemployment, and political instability. The German people were exhausted. They had been through World War I. The humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, economic collapse, and years of political chaos. When the National Socialist Party offered strength, unity, and national pride, millions of people who were not evil, who were not monsters, who were ordinary citizens, embraced it. Not because they wanted genocide, because they wanted stability. The first things the regime did weren't camps and war. The first things were infrastructure projects, economic programs, cultural events, and national pride campaigns. Germany went from economic basket case to an industrial powerhouse in less than a decade. Unemployment dropped. Roads were built. Factories hummed. And the people pointed to the results and said, "See, this works." The cost came later. It always comes later. Italy, 1922. After World War I, Italy was in turmoil. The economy was struggling. There were strikes, protests, and political violence. Benito Mussolini didn't seize power through a military coup. He marched on Rome with a few thousand followers, and the king handed him the government. The existing institutions were so weak, so discredited, so exhausted, that they literally stepped aside and let him take control. And a significant portion of the Italian public cheered, because he promised to make the trains run on time, to restore order, to bring back national greatness. Chile, 1973. After years of economic chaos, hyperinflation and political polarization under Salvador Allende's government, a military coup brought Augusto Pinochet to power. While the coup itself was violent, the regime that followed had significant public support, at least initially, because people were desperate for economic stability and Pinochet's economic reforms, designed by the so-called Chicago Boys, did eventually stabilize the economy at a horrific human cost. But in the moment, for many Chileans, stability was more important than freedom. Russia, 1999. After the chaotic 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Russian economy went into freefall, when oligarchs looted national assets and ordinary Russians saw their savings evaporate, Vladimir Putin came to power promising order, stability, and national pride. And he delivered, at least superficially. The economy stabilized. Russia regained international influence. And the Russian public, exhausted by a decade of chaos, traded democratic freedoms for the feeling that someone competent was in charge. Do you see the pattern? Every single time, the sequence is the same. Economic crisis leads to social instability. Social instability leads to a desperate desire for order. The desire for order opens the door to concentrated power. And concentrated power, once established, does not voluntarily disperse. This is not a left-wing idea or a right-wing idea. This is just what happens. The political flavor of the authoritarianism varies. Sometimes it comes from the right. Sometimes it comes from the left. But the underlying mechanism is identical. Fear plus chaos plus a charismatic solution equals control. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not predicting a specific outcome. I'm not telling you that your country is definitely becoming a dictatorship next year. What I am telling you is that the conditions that historically precede these transitions are present right now in multiple major economies simultaneously. That's not fear-mongering. That's pattern recognition. The global economy is more interconnected than at any point in human history. A financial crisis in one major economy can cascade globally within hours. We saw this in 2008. We saw it during the pandemic shutdowns. The system is efficient, but it's also fragile. And fragile systems, when they break fast. And here's what worries me most. In every historical example I just gave you, the population wasn't tricked into tyranny. They chose it. They chose it because the alternative, the chaos, the uncertainty, the freedom to fail, was more terrifying than giving up control. Ron Jones figured this out in a high school classroom in 5 days. Historians have documented it across centuries and continents. Psychologists have replicated it in controlled laboratory settings. The data is overwhelming. The question isn't whether this could happen again. It's happening all the time. In different forms, in different countries, to different degrees. The question is whether you'll recognize it when it shows up in your life. Because it won't announce itself. It won't come wearing a military uniform and demanding your papers. It'll come wearing a suit, speaking calmly, offering solutions and asking for your support. And you'll want to give it. That's the terrifying part. You will want to say yes. Because the chaos will be real, and the fear will be real, and the solution will feel like relief. Just like day one in that classroom. So what do you do with this information? Because if I just leave you with humans are psychologically wired for authoritarianism, and there's nothing you can do about it, that's not helpful. That's just despair. And despair is actually one of the things that makes people vulnerable to these forces. The first thing you do is what you're doing right now. You learn the pattern. Awareness is the single most effective defense against manipulation. Ron Jones's students didn't recognize what was happening to them because they'd never been taught to look for it. You have. Now you know about cognitive load reduction. When someone offers you simple answers to complex problems, that's a red flag. Real solutions to real problems are messy, complicated, and full of trade-offs. Anyone promising clean, easy answers is either naive or manipulating you. Now you know about social identity dynamics. When you feel the pull of us versus them thinking, when you feel yourself demonizing an entire group of people, pause. Ask yourself, am I responding to evidence, or am I responding to tribal instinct? Because the tribal instinct will always feel justified. That's what makes it dangerous. Now you know about incremental normalization. Pay attention to the small changes. The rights that are quietly traded for security. The surveillance that's gradually expanded for convenience. The financial controls that are slowly tightened for stability. Each one seems reasonable in isolation. It's the trajectory that matters. And now you know about the agentic state. When you find yourself saying, I'm just following the rules, or I'm just doing what everyone else is doing, stop. That's the agentic state talking. You are always making a moral choice, even when you choose to follow. The second thing you do is build financial resilience. And I don't mean this in a doomsday prepper kind of way. I mean it practically. Because economic desperation is the single biggest driver of the pattern we've been talking about. If you are financially stable, you are psychologically harder to manipulate. Reduce your debt. Build savings. Diversify how you store your wealth. Understand the difference between assets that depend on the system functioning perfectly and assets that retain value when systems are under stress. Real assets. Physical things. Skills that have value regardless of what the economy looks like. A person who has 6 months of expenses saved and no debt is in a fundamentally different psychological position than a person who is one paycheck from disaster. The first person can afford to think clearly. The second person is primed for someone to come along and say, follow me, and I'll make the pain stop. The third thing you do is maintain your social connections outside of any single group identity. One of the most powerful things the third wave did was replace students' individual identities with a group identity. Once that happened, leaving the group felt like losing yourself. This is how cults work. This is how radical movements work. This is how authoritarian societies work. They make the group your entire world, so that the thought of losing the group more terrifying than anything the group might ask you to do. The antidote is having multiple sources of identity, community, and meaning. Your family, your friends, your professional network, your hobbies, your neighborhood. The more diverse your social world, the less vulnerable you are to any single group capturing your identity. The fourth thing is this: practice tolerating uncertainty. This is the hardest one, because uncertainty is genuinely uncomfortable. But the ability to sit with the words "I don't know" is one of the most important psychological skills you can develop. Because the moment you cannot tolerate "I don't know," you become prey for anyone who says "I know." The students in Ron Jones's class couldn't tolerate not understanding how the Holocaust happened. That discomfort made them vulnerable to an authority figure who said, Let me show you. And by the time they understood, they were already inside the experiment. The world is uncertain right now. The economy is uncertain. The future is uncertain. And that uncertainty is uncomfortable. But the discomfort of uncertainty is infinitely preferable to the false comfort of surrendered freedom. Here's what I want you to take away from this. The third wave experiment is not ancient history. It's a user manual. It shows you, step by step, day by day, exactly how ordinary people are transformed into willing participants in systems they would have rejected a week earlier. The psychology hasn't changed. The mechanisms haven't changed. The only thing that changes is the context. And the context right now, the economic instability, the social fragmentation, the collapse of trust in institutions, is exactly the kind of environment where these mechanisms thrive. So don't join the wave. Recognize it, understand it, prepare for it. Build a life where you're resilient enough to withstand the pressure to conform. Build a mind where you're aware enough to see the pattern before it catches you. Because Ron Jones taught his students the hard way. You don't have to learn it the hard way. You just have to learn it before day 5.